Yes.
Not in mine. No, like we have limits, and like if we override those limits, we get penalized just for saying what we feel.
I think my school is mainly like a dictatorship. Like you listen to only one person, and that's the rules you have to follow.
A lot of teachers, they do not give you the opportunity to express yourself.
Yeah, I think it should be more free speech, definitely.
If we want to make a change, we got to stand up and we got to unite. And we have to be the voice of our change. We just can't wait around and wait for someone to make it for us.
Well, youth films in general, I think they're a good idea. And we just need to visualize, make sure everybody else sees it. Oh, this is happening, this is a problem.
How important is free speech on a college campus? Here's what the Supreme Court said in 1957 in the landmark case Sweezy v. New Hampshire. Teachers and students must always remain free to inquire, otherwise our civilization will stagnate and die. Inspiring words, and true. Which is why what's happening at American colleges and universities is so disturbing. A study conducted by the Association of American Colleges and Universities in 2010 revealed that only 30% of college seniors strongly agreed with the question, is it safe to hold unpopular positions on this campus? Worse, the study found that students' confidence that they can hold unpopular opinions declines from freshman to senior year.
It really is important that we take freedom of speech responsibility seriously, because there are two beneficiaries when it comes to freedom of speech. The person who has something to say, whether it's interesting, stupid, racist, clever, whatever, those people must have the right to say what they want to say. But more importantly is the right of the audience to hear them and to judge for yourselves if they are talking rubbish or saying something interesting. If you allow the state or the student unions or someone else to make that decision on your behalf, you are infantilizing yourself. Censorship is bad for people who are being censored, but it's even worse for everyone else, because our moral, intellectual muscles become weak. And it's incumbent upon us to fight for freedom of speech for everyone, so that we can make up our own minds about what's true, what's false, what's good, and what's bad.
Most of us know what to expect when it comes to the guardians of political correctness on university campuses. Whether it's Sandra Korn in the Harvard Crimson newspaper a couple of years ago, who argued that academic freedom should be replaced by what she called academic justice, or more recently the students of Wellesley College who alleged that, quote, shutting down rhetoric that undermines the existence and rights of others is not a violation of free speech, end quote. These students are enthusiastic about the suppression of so-called hate speech. Most of them can't provide a definition of what that is, but given that even the Supreme Court of Canada has had trouble doing so, it's not that surprising that undergraduate students struggle to explain coherently what they're so keen to outlaw.
There are two reasons I reject the category of hate speech. The first is that this is an ideological invention. It is explicitly designed to repress the expression of certain ideas, and it does that to great effect. It is an ideological tool disguised as a moral good. And the second reason I reject the category of hate speech is because it encroaches into the realm of free communication in an extraordinary way, in a way that no other law or censor in modern times has done. Because it polices not only ideas, but also emotions, feelings. It is the definition of government overreach. It has all the ingredients of tyranny.
How can it be that at a place where speech should be the most free, the university, young people fear merely holding, to say nothing of actually expressing, unpopular opinions? The reason is that for decades now, students have been sent a clear message from their schools. Express dissenting opinions, violate political correctness, or even just criticize the administration at your peril.
So on the first point, the ideology of the category of hate speech, you can really see its ideological component if you look at the history of the modern idea of hate speech. Because after the Second World War, the keenest proponents for controls on hate speech were the Soviet Union. And you had all these international gatherings in the 1940s and 50s where people were drawing up international treaties and so on. And the Soviets were always pushing for the criminalization of hate speech, particularly fascistic and racist speech. they wanted international treaties to demonize and potentially criminalize hatred and incitement to hatred. And amazingly, the West actually resisted their demands. Eleanor Roosevelt was leading the Western camp for a period of time while these international treaties were being drawn up. And she said it would be extremely dangerous to outlaw hate speech because any criticisms of public or religious authorities might all too easily be described as incitement to hatred. Now, amazingly, the Soviets won, and in 1965, the UN Convention outlawed the following: ideas based on racial superiority. The key word there is ideas. From the outset, hate speech laws were about repressing ideas, obnoxious ideas, but nonetheless ideas. It is an ideological tool for the repression of ideas. And even worse than being an ideological tool, it's an extremely elastic one. It's extraordinary how unwieldy and arbitrary hate speech laws are, and how much they have spread. So they've spread from criminalizing racial speech to criminalizing religious hatred. In Scandinavia, there are discussions to outlaw misogynistic speech. On campuses, they want to outlaw, or they no platform, transphobic speech. So hate speech restrictions spread and spread and spread. There's an unstoppable momentum, because once you accept the originally Soviet idea that some forms of speech are so hateful they must be repressed, then there is no end to what you might potentially censor.
Herbert Marcuse, the Frankfurt School cultural Marxist, said something along these lines in his 1965 essay, Repressive Tolerance, a must-read, by the way, for anyone who wants to understand the SJW particular tone deafness on free speech. It's a short essay, an easy read, and one that's breathtaking in its assumption that only righteous revolutionaries get to decide what kind of speech can be heard. For Marcuse, tolerance was not a virtue if it meant tolerating injustice, and therefore tolerance shouldn't be extended towards any public words that uphold a repressive status quo. Marcuse was also a man who stated quite openly in the same essay that violence on the part of the have-nots, as he called them, against the haves, wasn't really violence, or at least not the sort one need worry about too much. He's hardly a proponent of what any reasonable person could call a free and democratic society.
At Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, a student employee was found guilty of racial harassment for publicly reading a book that some of his fellow employees found offensive. The book was Notre Dame versus the Klan, and it was available in the school's library. It recounted and celebrated the defeat of the Ku Klux Klan when its members marched on Notre Dame in 1924. So what did the university find offensive? The photo on the book's cover. At the University of Delaware, students were forced to undergo ideological re-education as part of the university's compulsory student orientation program. The program was described as treatment for students with incorrect attitudes and beliefs. Students were taught to adopt highly specific, university-approved views on politics, race, sexuality, sociology, moral philosophy, and environmentalism. They were also required to attend one-on-one meetings with their resident assistants, where they were compelled to answer intrusive, probing, and utterly irrelevant personal questions such as, when did you discover your sexual identity? And an increasing number of schools are trying to drive religious students off campus. Vanderbilt University, for example, has enacted a policy that forbids faith-based student groups from selecting members and leaders based on their faith. As a result, 14 Christian groups have been de-recognized by the university. Then there are speech codes at a majority of American colleges and universities. What is a speech code? It is a university regulation or policy that limits or bans expression, written or verbal, that is protected under the First Amendment. Such codes are applied with glaring double standards against religious, conservative, or politically incorrect speech, or simply speech that a particular campus administration happens to dislike.
John Stuart Mill in On Liberty in 1869 spoke of the fundamental necessity of being able to defend an idea from objections to it. Obviously impossible if one can't even express the idea in a public forum without being shouted down. We could go even further back historically to John Milton and his Areopagitica of 1644, in which the search for truth is paramount and in which wrong ideas cannot defile the righteous mind. In fact, they're even necessary to the strengthening of that mind.
Censorship is the worst tool imaginable for challenging genuinely obnoxious, racist, anti-Semitic, misogynistic ideas, because it simply pushes them underground and it deprives us, ordinary people, of the right to challenge them and stand up to them and to argue them down. I love hearing hate speech. I relish it. It makes me feel really good because, firstly, because it reminds me that I live in a society that's so free you can be a disgusting person and say disgusting things. That's the nice thing to be reminded of. And secondly, because then I know who these people are and I know what they think and I can sock it to them. The day we don't hear hate speech is the day we should be worried, because that means we're living in a tyrannical society, and even worse, we have been morally disarmed of the freedom and the right and the responsibility to challenge genuinely horrible people.
There are things you are completely free to say and write off campus that will get you in serious trouble if you say or write them on campus. These codes include policies that ban speech that administrators find insulting or offensive. One absurd code that appeared at multiple universities banned inappropriately directed laughter. And in Orwellian fashion, some schools even limit free speech to tiny sections of campus called free speech zones. Recently, at the University of Central Arkansas, you were subject to disciplinary action if you said or did something deemed annoying to another student. In the most extensive study yet conducted of campus speech codes, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education found that 62% of America's top colleges maintain serious restrictions on written and verbal expression that violate First Amendment protections.
On campuses, you're not allowed to say that a person with a penis is a man. If you say that on campuses, they will accuse you of hate speech. This is the world we live in, folks. If you say a man is a man, you are accused of committing a hate speech crime. So the unstoppable logic is extraordinary. And students, I think, the students who try and clamp down on hate speech always present themselves as radicals, but actually they are the foot soldiers of a top-down, tyrannical attempt to repress the expression of ideas that started with the Soviet Union and was in the 60s and 70s embraced by Western powers.
First, campus censorship teaches students that they have a right not to be offended. The moment society says that people have the right not to be offended, it has announced the end of the right to free speech. Second, campus censorship teaches students poor intellectual habits. It teaches them not to think critically lest they arrive at a conclusion or express a thought that might offend someone. Further, students are taught to ignore the timeless principle that educated people should actively seek out intelligent people with whom they disagree for debate and discussion. And third, it teaches students that they have fewer rights than they actually have, that they must defer to arbitrary authority. A generation of students who don't know their rights and believe they must get permission before speaking their minds is not thinking like a free people, and that is a threat to a free society. The rights embodied in the First Amendment shape American society. They foster America's religious and cultural pluralism, spur scientific and scholarly innovation, and thus secure our remarkable prosperity. But today's universities, with their censorship, speech codes, and political correctness, are putting the future of this unique experiment in freedom at risk. This is the very opposite of what American higher education was founded to do.
I do think censorship is also being outsourced by the state to rising numbers of private groups, student unions, other kind of non-state bodies, and that is very worrying, and particularly the way in which student unions are kind of taking the baton from the state and are enforcing their own form of censorship of anything they don't like. Final thing, in relation to free speech as a means of discovering or trying to discover the truth, I think that's very important, and it's a point that John Stuart Mill makes, which is the only way you can be sure that what you're saying is potentially true is by testing it in public debate, subjecting it to ridicule and criticism and discussion and everything else. Otherwise, it's just dogma. If you just believe it because you know it's true, you're just a dogmatist, and I think that's the case with lots of these NUS officials who ban things. censorship is the midwife of stupidity. It makes you stupid. If you live inside a safe space and no kind of controversial idea or idea that you hate is allowed to enter that safe space, then you are making yourself into an idiot, and you are making yourself dogmatic. The safe space is a bigger trap for the people inside it than it is for the people outside. In the words of Cardinal John Henry Newman, the human intellect does from opposition grow. It's only through exposing yourself to opposition and criticism and abuse and offensiveness and outrage and insults that your own intellect can grow. So the thing that worries me most about students is that they are making themselves dumb. That's the real consequence of censorship. It's always just worth remembering that freedom of speech is not something that can be given to you. Freedom of speech is something that you have and you do and you exercise. If you wait around for someone to say, over here you're allowed to say such and such, then you'll be waiting forever.